So I know there was one group up here in the front. If you have one person that wants to do your report back. And there was another group over on this side. I know there were 2 in the front, and then there were clusters of 3 in the back on each side. Great. Okay, here's our first report back.
Okay. I think that we spent most of our time talking about the whole humanitarian aid to development aid transition. And so we were speaking on the one hand about the fact that humanitarian aid pulls out as development assistance is coming in way too early, and that has consequences because even as you're building up long-term resilience, there's a need to continue providing relief at the same time, and that happens too early. But then we also spoke about the problem in the transition in the opposite way, and so we were speaking about the fact that we can very often predict where there are going to be crises, and the organizations that, well or not well, are the ones who are actually paying attention to where the crises are going to be are the humanitarian aid organizations. Mm-hmm. However, if you use that map of there's going to be a water crisis here, there's going to be a famine there, in order for development assistance organizations to come in and start working on community resilience before the crisis happens, something which doesn't very often happen because that's not the way that development agencies think, then that can also have benefits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Terrific, thank you. Do we have a second group that wants to report out? Okay, we have a recommendation from the other side of the room.
Thank you, John. Well, I think several of the issues were discussed within the group, but the major recommendation has been based on common understanding by all stakeholders. And then it was recommended that an integrated multi-sectorial programming approach to ensure successful implementation and impact.
Our group started talking about shocks and stress as important elements of the resilience discussion. Could be opportunities for radical change. So we shouldn't have to be always thinking about shocks as if they are always bad. And particularly in the settings that we are in developing countries, where resilience of what is the existing system doesn't mean much. We have to understand that resilience would be, a system would be resilient, but at zero. So we have to shift the discussion, the discourse that resilience has to be an integral point for transformation. Transformation has to be the central element of discussion, particularly when we're talking security and poverty, chronic poverty. So that was the central message that we had. And we talked how to then shift the discussion from households, community level, into what constrains people becoming resilient and having transformation. Those issues are usually beyond the household. There are issues which are institutions, norms, rules, regulations, and corruption and inequity issues. So our shift and the donor communities has to think and shift, and instead of always measuring whether the communities' households are resilient, into shifting how do you then resolve those structural issues that are constraining people from using their strengths. Communities have quite a lot of strengths and potential to change. We have to understand that, and that has been constrained by other factors. So we can shift and help them see the institutional constraint. That would be a very useful exercise.
Our group looked at several issues. One, it's on partnership and who has to be on board for resilience to happen. And then what are the principles and who is leading the interventions. And also we looked at what must be done and how that work must be done. And we tried to do a sentence because you asked to have only one recommendation. So we said building resilience requires that capacities and partnership across all levels, national and local. And ensuring that, of course, we are not only focusing on sector, but system-wise approach, and that we are saying that the communities must be facilitated as active partners who are leading the interventions from planning, from monitoring, from evaluating, and they're working there. And we were also saying that it's long-term funding, that we said that the intervention should have important principles, like, for example, flexibility in funding that allows for long-term focus and that gender focus that should be there too, and ensuring that women's lived experiences is acknowledged and is utilized. And we were told that there are two catalysts that we must ensure that we focus on, is that issues of insecurity, particularly in Africa, if we want to build true resilience, and infrastructure development. Yeah, so those were our points.
Great. Thank you. You succeeded in capturing quite a lot. Okay, our next report back.
Okay, thank you. I really don't think this mic is. It says on, but not amplified. Yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah.
In our group, we had representatives from research institutions and some NGOs. So what we talked about a lot was improving the connections between scientific and research institutions and local community level. And in terms of a few things, better climate information communication, also tools and processes for measurement of how communities are doing on resilience, like we've been talking about on the panel, and also better tools for helping communities cope and be more resilient. It was interesting, we brought up the fact that some of these tools and bridging of those gaps have started, but then some people in our group were saying, it hasn't made it to my country, hasn't made it to my communities. So I think that those things are starting, but from our group that more of that could be done. So we're communicating better on those things.
Great, thank you. Yes, Lori. Get a mic to you.
Okay, thank you. So our group also had a very rich discussion approaches. We began a discussion of our tendency to be siloed as implementers, but also that donors tend to be siloed as well. And we're talking to different donors for emergency response, and yet again, different donors. Empowerment and the social networks, and that those tend to be downplayed, and we need to call upon donors to raise the importance of those issues because they're having much more impact than they're getting credit for. So,
great, thank you.
In our group, we spend a lot of time talking about processes and from an agency perspective or implementing agency and a donor perspective. So our conclusion was that implementing agencies need to rededicate themselves to participatory approaches that embrace the kinds of systems analysis that was being talked about by the panel, and to understand what's really driving the vulnerability and target those things. And then in addition to that, that's going to result in information that's coming out of the community that is going to require adaptive management, as what John was talking about, emergent management processes. And that's going to require the donor to be much more flexible in terms of their pipeline and how their actual their results-based management works. And that perhaps results-based management is actually not really that relevant to resilience because you are really having to change your plans quite frequently to have an effect of what's going on the ground. And as long as you're achieving the high-level outcomes, that's actually a much better outcome.
Great. Yes, we have 2 more report backs on this side, I believe. Let's see if that mic is working.
It's working? Here, okay. I'll speak really loudly then.
Great.
Okay. I'll just do that. Okay, perfect. We decided that donors and host governments and implementers need to take a long-term, integrated, adaptive approach to build an enabling environment for resilience. And we said these are the following ways they should do that. There needs to be a multi-donor fund or a trust fund or a global competitive fund. And the funding needs to come in stages, and they need to specifically address the gathering of information about vulnerability and capacity for response from the different strata of the population, specifically focused on women and children.
Great. Okay, we had a report back from up here in the front.
Sorry. So what do we need? Sorry, thanks. We need time, obviously, and kind of very similar to what you were saying. The way that we can do this is through better coordination, and we see that needing to happen within donor agencies themselves, and then also with the public, private sector, and civil society all getting together and sharing, learning, creating an evidence base so that we get the space to have more long-term planning and programming.